Well, hello, my name is Jen Miller, and I am one of the outside sales representatives with Flom Publishing, and I'd love to welcome you in this evening with my soon-to-be guest, Dr. Marilyn Kravitz-Tulin, for the webinar this evening of Gift of Traditions, Nourishment for the Family Faith Formation. If you don't know much about Dr. Marilyn, that is what we're here to do this evening, is tell you more about her, how we've come up with this idea of working together with Dr. Marilyn and the Gospel Weeklies. And we now have a landing page, gospelweeklies.com, where you can locate Dr. Marilyn specifically through her own landing page. And there you will find various weekly reflections of the gospel, lessons, reviews of the gospel for that week, as well as contacting her directly through her own email, as well as any past webinars that we have done together. So Dr. Marilyn, though, has served, and she continues to serve in the catechetical ministry of the church and the field of religious education. And she also has a PhD in religious education from Fordham University, Bronx, New York. But I feel what makes her an excellent resource for you, for your programs, is she's a live mentor for you in regards to the Gospel Weeklies program. But also, she is a mother of 5 adult children, and she's also a grandmother of grandchildren who range from the ages of 5 through 18 years old. And she is continuing the faith, the foundation, our roots of our Catholic faith through her family as well. So she has lots of ideas and tips and things like that. So if she is not only a wonderful support source for her own family, but possibly you're a DRE of a parish and you're thinking about incorporating a family catechesis program, she's excellent for that. Do you have a family catechesis program, but you're maybe looking to kind of take it up a notch, or maybe move on to really giving support to those families, to the parent, maybe expanding a little bit to the grandparent? Dr. Marilyn is perfect for that as well. So, Dr. Marilyn, are you with us by chance?
Here I am. Yes, I am.
There she is.
Well,
happy Advent and Merry Christmas season that we are in at the moment. And I'm so glad to have you here, and that we can do this other webinar together. And I look forward to so many more in the future. But this evening, we're going to be talking about the gift of traditions and nourishment for family faith formation. And I know we were going to talk about how we got started on this, this topic, but let's say a quick prayer, and then we can kind of start chatting, and then we can get the webinar going.
okay. So, hello, everyone. Let's just put ourselves in the presence of God as we ask. Dear God, we thank you for bringing us together. As we continue on during these last days of Advent, we ask you to bless us and our families as we wait to celebrate the birth of your Son. We thank you for your blessings and for the opportunities of spiritual and personal growth. As we will be thinking about our family traditions, we ask you for the grace to see you in the celebrations we share with those we love. May the joy of our traditions also remind us of the memories they create. May we be nourished by them. And may the celebration of the birth of your Son fill us with awe in the realization of the greatest gift you have given us, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Well, soon we're going to, I'm going to share my screen and show some wonderful photos that go along with this webinar, but let's chat on how we came up with this idea.
Yeah, so Jen and I were talking last week, I think, or we were talking about doing this webinar. We weren't sure what to do, but I was also Jen has become like a good friend. And I guess I was kind of just saying, oh, Jen, Christmas is coming. There's so much to do. And, and I was sharing with her how I was said to my daughter-in-law last year, listen, next year I'm really changing things. It's just gotten too hard. I live by myself. To put up a real tree is just aggravation. And it's difficult. So I think I'm going to get an artificial tabletop. And my daughter-in-law, Shana, said, you can't. And I'm like, why can't I? And she said, because when we first walk into your house on Christmas Eve, that's the first thing we see. and that welcomes us. I said, oh boy, I guess there's no tabletop going to happen yet.
Nope,
Just maybe
not yet.
living, right? Maybe if you were living somewhere else, but no, all these years, you can't change that. I said, all right, but let me tell you what I really would also like to change. But now that I can't do the tree, I would like to change the creche. I have a huge creche. It's very heavy to carry it from upstairs. So I said, put a little one up. She said, you can't do that. I said, no, why can't I do that? And she said, because that's the creche where one grandchild each year puts Jesus in the manger. And you just can't, unless it was somewhere else. So I said, all right, Jen, Shayna, yes, I'll do that. So we started to talk about it. And I said, I started thinking about our other traditions, and everybody has them. I said, wouldn't it be great to share those traditions with others, and they can share with me as well. But all of a sudden, as I thought more about it, I realized it's one thing to do the tradition. It's another thing to evolve from it. And I see that in my family. Now, my own children have been exposed to certain traditions over the years. They don't say much about them, but they do tell me if anyone is missing, they'll be very upset. So, which is very interesting. But the grandchildren are the ones who have come up to me, the older ones, and say, thank you, Grandma, for doing this, carrying on this tradition. It means so much. So just by them saying that, I had to dig deeper and find out what it means, what that means. And we'll share that with you later on in this time with you. So that's what happened. And that's why we're doing the whole idea of tradition, and not only tradition because we do it to do it, but to understand it and let it be a form or a tool for religious education as well.
Right. That is, I think, when we first started talking about it, we all have traditions. But to be able to kind of have the different branches come out from those traditions, I think is very important.
Yeah. So let me just begin, by just telling you what is the definition of tradition. So if you look at the dictionary, you will find that tradition is the handing down of statements, beliefs, legends, customs, and information from generation to generation, especially by word of mouth or by practice. So in our using and our sharing of traditions, we're passing on something very important to the next generation and the generation after. And the tradition is the one thing, we name it, but it's the ritual that makes it come alive. That's the response to the tradition. So what we do when we do celebrate traditions, it's our actions that make this a ritual. And I'll explain that in a minute as well. If you ever really want to know which I love this definition of tradition, I totally invite you to watch the movie Fiddler on the Roof. If you haven't seen it there or in a play form, I really encourage you to watch it. Fiddler on the Roof is a story about a Jewish family who lives in Anatevka in Russia, I would say just before the start of World War I. And they mentioned the Tsar, so that's how I know that. They're very, very poor. And they try to find their way of living in some of these really difficult, unjust situations. The very first song that Tevye, the main character, sings is called Tradition. And he talks about, and he sings about it, and he tells people what he does, and he uses his prayer shawl and all these, and they have the matchmaker for marriages and all of that. And some of them he never even has questioned because they just are traditions. But as we see, as the movie continues, and these traditions, which have offered him such stability in the life of uncertainty, we start to see some of these traditions being questioned or challenged. And while there's nothing wrong with that, because we can't just say, oh, because that's what we do, it's nice to know why we do them. So it's a great, great story. And you see the traditions that they share, the Jewish faith, really interesting. And of course, that's where our faith comes from. So it's nice to see those rituals like the Shabbat and the weddings and things like that they practice. So that's how, I would invite you to do that. And when Tevye talks to us and we watch this movie, we start to realize that there are two kinds of traditions going on. There's cultural traditions and there's faith traditions. What do I mean by cultural traditions and celebrations? Well, for example, we have birthdays. That's secular, that's cultural. For a 15-year-old girl who's Hispanic from background, they have a quinceañera, so we have sweet 16s, and there's all kinds of bar mitzvahs, although that's a faith tradition, but it's still a cultural tradition as well. We have birthdays. So that's the tradition. What do we do to make it a ritual? We put candles in a cake and we sing happy birthday and give gifts. That's the ritual. So we do that. We have graduations. We have anniversaries. We even celebrate holidays that are secular. 4th of July. How do we know 4th of July? By the fireworks and by sparklers and American flags. We do Thanksgiving. That's a secular holiday. So, there are definitely ways that we see that happening in the world large. But we also celebrate faith traditions. And what do I mean by faith traditions? Well, first of all, we have liturgical traditions. We have devotions. We have the rosary. We have we have the mass, certainly. And then we have sacraments. Those sacraments are certainly traditional. And then we have holy days and feasts. And we even celebrate, like, look at St. Patrick's Day. I don't know where you live, but I live in New Jersey in the tri-state area, and St. Patrick's Day is a big deal. Everybody's Irish, so I don't even know, but that's also a faith tradition because of who he was, but it's also a cultural tradition. So what I'm trying to say is that cultural and faith traditions sometimes overlap, but they're both very equally important. And it's important to see, that happens and that it's okay if they overlap. What we have to be aware of is, misinformation with that. And it's very interesting. Like Italian people, for example, they mix up both the cultural and the faith on Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve is the faith time, but they also have 7 fishes that they celebrate on Christmas Eve. So there you have the mix of two. I had a mother-in-law who was Polish, her heritage was Polish. And she said to me one day, we, Christmas Eve, you don't eat meat on Christmas Eve. And I said, who told you that? And she said, well, you don't. And I said to her, well, the church doesn't say that. And she's, oh, yes, it does. I said, no, it doesn't. I said, that's probably a culture thing. And sure enough, that's what it had been for her, at least as a little girl. So, those things are going to overlap and interact. And that's okay, because that's who we are. Right. We are people of culture as well as people of faith. So sometimes that's going to be, overlapping with each other, and that's okay. But the important thing is to have these traditions and to celebrate them and what they mean to us. So because of, Christmas is upon us, there are plenty of Christmas traditions we can talk about. And I would just like to share some with you. So the first would be for the Christmas, and I'm sure you're all aware, you're still doing this, is lighting the Advent wreath. So the three purple or blue candles and the one pink. Actually, this coming Sunday, Gaudete Sunday, we will all be wearing rose in church, and you're making that connection. And for the children, it has, and then for me too. I mean, to see the progression of the Advent period, the time, and that we are getting closer, and there is a sense of excitement. Children do that with Advent calendars as well. I'm not so sure about Elf on the Shelf. That's another story we can talk about another time. But definitely, the whole idea and the tradition of the Advent wreath is our sign that something is about to happen. It's something very exciting. And, you do this year after year after year. You have it, but there's something about pulling out those candles and putting them in the Advent wreath that makes it very special.
Yes. And I love seeing all the wax there
under all the years.
Yeah, all the years, all the memories.
Yeah.
In there. That's really nice.
Yeah. The other thing is we have Christmas cookies, and I'm sure many of you do this, but there's a story behind these cookies. When I was first married over 50 years ago, someone had given me this Tupperware set, and it had one of these, you rolled the dough out on a plastic mat. And on this mat was a recipe for sugar cookies. So I said, oh, I'll try it. So this is even before I had children. I made these cookies, and my nieces and nephews love them so much. I've been baking them for 50 something years. I mean, I still do. And now it evolved not only to Christmas, but to first communions, to baptisms, other holidays. And now the great thing about it, though, I have grandchildren who help me do this. because
Oh,
you can just roll for so long and then, your back starts to hurt. So these have been, and again, if I were to say to you, no Christmas cookies this year, oh, it would be devastating. It's just so interesting how they react to things like that. So we have our Christmas cookies, and we share them, and again, very important.
yes. And think about, and I always think about the memories, that you build every
Yeah.
year after year during these traditions and the
Mhm.
ritual traditions, of making the cookies and the conversations and deepening your relationship, and it could be with your own mother, it could be with your
Mhm.
grandchildren, it could be, across the board. It's very nice.
I remember going back to cookies for a second. It was Valentine's Day, and I teach the children religion on a Monday, and I did a lesson on Valentine's Day, but I had to make the Valentine's cookies. And I said, we'll do that. But I said, we're going to turn this into a religious experience. So help me. So it was, we made as we talked and back and forth, we made these Valentines, and we started to pray for the chicken who laid the eggs, and for the person who got the vanilla beans out of the vanilla. And there's people behind this, the flour, and who did that, and who did the sugar cane. So they were, we turned it into something, not only something that we did, which was fun, but also has a sense of sacred to it. And I think that tradition is what makes them so special. No matter what they are, there's a sense of the sacred involved. And I think that's why we love them so much. We can't quite name it or label it, but we know there's something other than just doing what we're doing.
Right.
The dialogue, whatever we have going on, are you doing it out of love? The kids love it. So even if my head is hurting me, I'm going to make those cookies because it's all out of love. Don't want to disappoint anybody.
Absolutely. And that's
So
one of the things I really enjoy about your landing page, on our gospelweeklies.com website. While you're teaching from the Gospel Weeklies about that lesson for that gospel, you can incorporate all these neat, fulfilling customs, rituals, traditions that is so important to your family. And this is a perfect example.
yeah. So then we have decorations. So what are decorations other than making us feel the sense of something is different? When the house is decorated for Christmas, we know it's different from the regular time, the ordinary time of life, right?
Right.
And we're just getting ready. I think this is a gesture to say we're getting ready. We're getting ready to welcome, the Christ child. Honestly, I have never decorated the house. That was always something my daughter did with her dad, and that's where it stays. I take it all down, and I do that part of it. But that was always something very special to her. So whenever the time comes, she'll have the honor of doing that for me, with her husband now. So, but decorations are important, and just to give us the sense of warmth and of comfort. I think it warms up the house. So
Mhm,
that's the
mhm.
importance of decorations.
Right. And again, handing down those traditions.
Mhm. And of course, our Christmas tree. That's interesting. I was reading something about Christmas trees, and the whole idea of Christmas trees started years ago, but our most recent place of where this tradition is Germany. But even before that, they called the people would put up a tree, they would cut a tree down in the forest and call it a paradise tree to remind us of Adam and Eve. And they would hang apples from the tree and to remind us, um, that there can be a paradise, even though Adam and Eve, messed it up, that we still can have that. And as you know, Christmas trees have evolved over the years. And there was a time, I think, that was really reintroduced at the time of Queen Victoria, and they hung all kinds of things on the trees that was different. But Christmas trees are special
Mm,
because when we look at our ornaments, they tell our story. So I could go into your house, Jen, and
mhm.
I could look at your Christmas tree and look at your ornaments and say, oh my goodness, you've done this, or you've been there, or
Right.
I get to know your story a little bit and what it's been for you. For us, it's always been hanging an ornament where we travel. That was always a tradition to do
Mhm.
that. Or when the kids were little, things still, I should really give them to the kids. But for now, I still have them hanging on the tree. So this was the days of having a real tree, and switched now to an artificial tree. But It'll do for now. It'll
That's
do.
right. That's right.
That's
Because
the
you
way
can
it is.
always go back to the real tree as well.
Yeah.
I had a tradition with my boys. They had their own Christmas tree, and every year in their stocking, I would put a new ornament that would signify what was going on in their life that year. So
Oh, yeah.
whether it was something that really, transpired academic wise, or whether
Hmm.
it's sports, whether it was an accomplishment, something like that. So as the years went by, then you could
Yes.
look at that tree and see all that,
Yeah.
all those memories.
Yes. Yes. Or things that the children made when they were little,
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
that kind of thing. And it just the memories and such great times. So
Yes.
then we come to Christmas Eve. And in our family, we're really blessed because we all get to attend Mass together on Christmas Eve. That's where we start our celebration. And then we come home, obviously, and here's little Damien when he was really little. One of the first things we do is change the candles in the Advent wreath from purple and pink to white. And that was his job that year. So he was very serious about it, and he changed those candles. So and he still talks about that. So this day, he's like 9 years old, and he still talks about changing those candles. So that's very special.
It really is.
The other thing that we've done that we do, I mentioned it before about the creche, is putting baby Jesus into the manger.
Mhm.
So I think we have that. Yeah, there we go. So we take out a paper bag and put everybody's name who hasn't had the opportunity yet, shake it up, pull up a name, and whoever does puts Jesus in the manger. So
Oh,
that, yeah. And last year, this is so funny. The oldest grandchild, who's 18 years old, never had the opportunity because his name was never drawn. Last year, his name was drawn, and he was jumping all over. It's so funny. I finally got to do this. Like I'm not the only one left anymore. This is so cool. 18 years old. It was really great. So, has been really a very important thing for us. The creches is the huge one. And I'm not sure if you know this, or maybe you haven't heard this before. St. Francis is the one we give credit to for creating the first creche, because he was realizing and teaching about Christmas. People still weren't understanding the whole story. So he would put on like a Christmas play, and it become, and people would take on the roles of people when Jesus was born. And that's how we learned, that was passed on, that tradition. And if you ever have a chance to go to Assisi, there's a town nearby, of course, where Francis was from, in Greccio is where this all happened for him, where he would put on these plays. And if you go into the church in Greccio, and you look around, there's like a balcony, and on this balcony are creches from all over the world. And
oh,
it's really, really very beautiful. And but as he did, he wanted people to be able to almost touch what was happening so that they could understand it better. So when my children were little, we had our special creche, it was very pretty. But they had their own little creche with, they could play with, and they could
oh,
play the roles, and they
yeah.
could, bring the wise men and do whatever they needed to do. Sometimes they played individually, and sometimes they played together as siblings.
Yeah.
So, and they would talk, and it would be really, really cute to hear them. But that's how they learn too. It's by hands-on kind of things. So that was always very special and important to them. So there again, here's an example of learning religiously. It's outside of the classroom. It doesn't have to be a classroom. You're always learning, and for them to hand on the faith, for us to hand on the faith, this is really a very special way to do it as well.
Yes, absolutely beautiful.
The other thing, many of you may notice what this is. This comes from the Polish or the Eastern European tradition of taking a wafer, and you see this wafer, it's almost like a communion wafer, but it's a rectangle. And this one happens to have a picture of Mary and Joseph and baby Jesus in the manger. And what you do after Jesus is put into the manger, what we do then is everybody takes one of these wafers, and we go to each other, and you break off a piece for each person, and at that person you say Merry Christmas and I love you, and all those kinds of I wish you a great year. So that was never part of my tradition growing up. That was again from my husband's family, and it's certainly stayed in. And the plate that I have there I've had for, I think since, years and years and years. And one of my sons says, Mom, I don't want to inherit anything of yours. All I want is that plate when you go. So I said, okay, Michael, I'll have to remember. He said, because so many wonderful things happened with that plate. So even the plate is a tradition, and the
Well,
memories
it's
from that is
every
there.
every person I'm sure in your family, has their own
Yeah,
special
exactly.
tradition.
Exactly.
And
And
in
I
all
had
of our families.
yeah, absolutely. Everybody's family has something, everyone. So the other thing with this, uh, during COVID, of course, we could not meet for Christmas, which was horrible. But what I did do, I mailed a wafer to everybody, to each of my kids. And they got them and they're calling me and they're crying and they're going, everybody was just so
Oh,
done with the virus. But just to have that tradition, even in the middle of a pandemic, for them, and of course they could do this with their own families because they were in isolation with them. So that was, to this day, talk about that. I remember getting that in the mail. So those little gifts of love, like it says on that plate, that's a religious experience. That's religious education, as well.
mhm.
That's important for all of us.
I love your creativity as well. That's what makes you, I think, so wonderful when you're teaching and instructing, whether it's an adult,
Yeah.
in some of the different things that you've done in your past or with your own family and children. You have such a creative way of explaining and teaching and instructing the gospel. I think it's wonderful.
I love doing it. I just want to, can I just go back to the other
Oh,
one
sure
for a
you
second?
may. Sure you
Okay,
may.
thank you.
Uh-huh.
Talking about this, the name of this whole idea, this Polish tradition, is called platek.
Mm,
And now I know where my mother-in-law was getting her information, because I read about it, before. Um, Christmas Eve was considered the last day of Advent, and many years the church, for the people anyway, they fasted a lot for Advent, not just for Lent, but for Advent as well. So when they were celebrating Christmas Eve, which is the last day of Advent, they were still fasting, so they wouldn't eat meat. So I said,
right.
she has a point. She just didn't know where it came from, but I learned that that's where it came from. So I just wanted to
Interesting.
mention that when you do the research, it's interesting to find out where these traditions come from, and then we
Right.
continue to use in 2022, So,
Right.
okay.
And is this plate, it's kind of hard to tell, but is it pewter or is it
It's
wood?
pewter.
Okay.
It's pewter. And
It's
many times we have had, well, for example, the day after my son Michael, the one who wants this plate,
mhm.
the day after their wedding, we had mass outside in the backyard, and the priest who did, not the priest who did the wedding, but another Jesuit from where he knew, came up to the house, and we had everybody, like immediate family. We had mass in the backyard, and we used this plate. So for the hosts. So that's, again,
How
from
nice. No wonder
that's
it's so
why he remembers.
special. But
But
see, again,
yeah,
your
yeah.
creativity of tying it all together
Mhm.
is a true talent for
Yeah.
sure.
Um, And then finally, of course, it wouldn't be Christmas without singing Happy Birthday to Jesus.
Yes.
And again, it's an ice cream cake. They all know it. They know it's coming. And
Yes.
as you can see in the background there's the Advent wreath with the white candles in the back.
Yes.
And it just wouldn't be Christmas. They had the balloons and as you can see, it's decorated. I go to the supermarket and I go to the bakery section. I get my cake. I go to the bakery section and I say, could you please write something on this? And they go, oh, sure. What do you want on it? So happy birthday, Jesus. And they're like, what? Happy birthday. Well, it is Christmas. That's what Christmas is
Absolutely.
about. And they start to think about it. And
Uh-huh.
there's another moment of teaching, or sharing, a religious or faithful moment, And then
Totally.
that's when people say, I haven't been to church in a while. Or I don't even know these people, but it's so funny what something like that will even evoke in people. They need to talk to someone who might get it. So this is again a very special tradition
Yes.
as well. So with all of these traditions, as I said to you before, my children never really talked about it. They just know if something's missing, it has to happen. So I was with my grandchildren and children this last Saturday. I decided to ask them what was so special about traditions. And I decided to make a word cloud because I thought just some of the words, would really help out with this. So to understand it. So it was very, very interesting because they all had something to say. And one of the first things they had said, well, of course, the family, which is created of people, and we share our traditions, not only the old traditions, but also to create new memories. and time, and that Jesus is so important in the middle of all this traditional stuff, you know. They were interesting because what they said is, and I'm thinking about it, and the more I thought about it, the more I think we need something like this in today's world. I think it's such an unstable world. The children certainly feel it with all that that's gone on for them between COVID and everything else. And they're worried a lot of the time. So the idea of a tradition and carrying them out ritualistically is really important. One of them said, tradition gives you consistency. You know it's going to happen. You can rely on it. You can depend on it. You know it's going to happen. Have a feeling of belonging. You know, that's important. And while people are different, there's a sense of cohesiveness, that each of us is a different person, but it's the tradition that brings us and pulls us together and makes it cohesive. Interestingly, one of them said, people will come and go, whether we bring new people come in through marriage, people pass, whatever, but the tradition stays the same. And that for them was very important, that to know that there's that sense of stability, and they offer stability. The memories that they have already are revisited. So I'm sure when my grandson Michael was jumping up and down last year when he got to put Jesus in the manger, that was a memory from when he was a child, because it was very childlike action, but it was just his, that memory, it was coming back. They said traditions are safe. You know you're in a safe place. There's something about it. And for them, that seems to be very important, that we can be ourselves, and yet we can allow ourselves to be open to receiving as well. So when we give gifts, we can watch the other people's reaction. I mean, they kept going on. And I thought, how great is that? Because they're really seeing this possibility as being selfless, which is what you want them to do eventually. So they were very serious about it. And they said they love spending time with the family, of course, that the traditions unite us, but there's a sense of excitement. Something's going to happen. Christmas is still exciting. As old as you get, there's a sense of awe. It's a sense of excitement. They ground us. That was their wording. Traditions ground us. It's sharing traditions that are old, yet we can create new ones in addition to the old. And what they all said, and I asked them the question, would you change any of them? I would not change one tradition that we've had. I would add to it, and I might add to it when I have children, but we're going to keep the same traditions as they already are. Again, about being with them, making Jesus the spotlight, the center of, it didn't take a lot. It doesn't take a lot. And I think just, that's a piece of it. And those of the children who are either struggling, or even us as adults are struggling, there's something about, again, this sacredness. In a tradition, at least this has been my experience, there is something sacred going on beyond us. And whether it's that cohesiveness that comes, Jesus remains at the center. When you come home from Mass and the first thing you do is put Jesus in the manger, Jesus is center. It's not us, And the beauty of this also is that there's traditions for other times as well. Easter's coming, we'll be here, and before you know it, great traditions there. I know I make my grandmother's bread, and God forbid I didn't make grandma's bread, and the cookies. We have cookies as well. We have all kinds of things happening in that are coming up, and it doesn't. That's what we do, and we belong to a church also that's very traditional and very ritualistic, and there's something about those rituals that are very important for them. And I think, again, for the family unit, I can say to you, I learn something new every year when I watch them as they grow, and what they're getting out of them, and how they participate, and how important it is for them. And I wouldn't trade it for I can't imagine not doing it any other way.
Right. Well, when you first brought up the word cloud idea, and you were talking about how I'm going to see my family this weekend and I'm going to ask them, and that kind of struck me, because I thought, I have in my mind as a mother, what I did all those years as tradition for my children. But it would be so interesting to ask them what their thoughts and feelings, how those traditions made them feel. What did, what tradition was most important to them. I know what was important to me, but what was important to them. And so and you can, like you said, you can do that with any other holiday. My children are adult children now. They both have, significant ladies in their lives, soon to probably start the families. And there you go. All those traditions just come back.
And when you go back to the definition from the dictionary, it's handing on from generation to generation. And that's what you hope, that's when you talk about handing on the faith. That's what is meant.
Right.
And I think people do this, but they're not sure what to do, or maybe don't feel secure enough to start their own traditions. I think there's some beautiful things. You just look at the liturgy, and what comes out of that we can bring home to the domestic church, the home, the church at home. And we can, and it's not a question of copying it. It's a question of, elevating it, and by bringing it into the home, so that when we understand, like, the altars in church are our dining room tables at home, and what we do, we share stories. As short stories are shared, through the scriptures, we also share, that. And the other tradition, we, as a church, going back to the church, the two ways we do hand on the faith is through sacred scripture and sacred tradition. And sacred tradition is the, the teachings, the doctrines that come down, have come down through the apostles. So, church is traditional unto itself, but how do we make that real for us as well, and make it meaningful and relevant in 2022? That's the key. And my suggestion, always ask the children, ask them, what do they think, and how do you connect it all? Last year, we, one of the lessons around Christmas time, I had them teach me a lesson. I said, I'm not teaching this lesson. It's about Christmas. I think you can do it. And they were like, Grandma, what do you mean? I said, just do it. And they decided to choose a song at the end of the lesson. And it was Mary, Did You Know, which is a beautiful song. So the following year, when that Christmas came, they whoever put Jesus into the creche, we played the song, Mary, Did You Know? So for Sage, who had chosen the song for her religious class, or lesson, I should say, was making those connections. Like, I did it. I'm the one who found it, but it's being used and it's being honored, So that's hard. That's faith formation. I'm not simplifying it, but I think for them, it's just really, it's important. It honors their thoughts and honors their own thinking and creativity as well.
You were talking about asking the children, this time of society where we are right now. The gospel weeklies are so engaging and teach the weekly gospel so well. But working along with you, Dr. Marilyn, is another excellent way to connect the faith formation to the family and to keep those traditions growing and growing from year after year after year. So I loved this webinar.
Did you?
Oh, I did.
love doing it.
I'm
glad I was able to share, some of it with you.
Well, it's because we all have family, and maybe we have some family up in heaven as well, but those traditions we can continue, but sometimes we can build traditions with friends, with parish family. So there's so many different ways to go here, but I really, really enjoyed having you today. And I really want to ask everyone who's watching the webinar to make sure that you go back to gospelweeklies.com and locate Dr. Marilyn's landing page. And on that homepage of gospelweeklies.com, you can scroll down to resources for families and you can find it right there. And you can click on her landing page, and like I said, get weekly reflections for each Sunday's gospel lessons, as well as reaching out to Dr. Marilyn personally and just saying hello, and just maybe bouncing off a question or two or an idea for your parish. She's
Or send me, excuse me, or send me what traditions you have. I would love to know what everybody does. I mean, mine's just a little, piece of it, but I'm sure there's so many other traditions that people have. And I think that's, again, it's important to have that. And I think it's important to share that
right.
because we are, it'd be really interesting. Like you can even maybe adopt one or here or there, but from someone else. There's nothing as long as it's meaningful to you and to your family. So
Mhm.
I think I think traditions are wonderful. I'm really, they are a gift. There's no
Yeah,
two ways about it, and they help us.
for sure. Well, going forward in 2023, we will have other webinars with Dr. Marilyn, and we are even looking at doing a webinar where we can talk back and forth with you all as well. So always look out for that e-blast for the webinar with Dr. Marilyn Kravitz-Tulin. And again, Marilyn, we just really appreciated having you this evening, and thank you again. And until next time.
Thank you, Jen. And everybody, blessed Christmas season to everyone.
Yes, yes. Have a wonderful evening and Merry Christmas.